Hello everyone and my dear subscribers. So I decided to make a sequel to my opinions on classes video to clear some things and answer some of the questions in comment section. And then I'll be adding the classes which won't be there for release as well. If you haven't seen my first video on classes, I do recommend you to watch the video prior to watching this one because I cover the 15 classes releasing for the West in that video. The link is right up here. In the preface section on my previous video, I talk about how there's been a recent patch in KR limiting gold reward to 6 characters per account. What this means is if you enter a tier 3 weekly endgame content, the character is set as a gold earning character for that week. And you can do this up to 6 characters only. I mean, KR had the game for 3 years. People who have been playing the game for those years are more than likely to have more than 6 characters. But anyways, what I wanted to say in the preface during my previous video is, I understand that in case of NA and EU, it's a different story from KR because starting the game knowing this as opposed to being taken of what you used to have is completely different. But still, I was hoping to provide you with some info on the classes because choosing a class became more important than what it used to be. The West release is most likely to get the gold limit thing because the director did mention during his recent stream that this seems healthier for the long run of the game. Next thing I want to mention from the last video is about support classes. I received a lot of comment asking where's Paladin? I probably should have inserted a big text on why I don't talk about support classes in the video. This is my fault. Here's the reason why. Who's gonna support the Sorks? Now, we all know this is just a simulation and who knows how legit this poll is. But just for fun, if we calculate this, approximately 21.5% of the population will be made up of supports. Lostark party system is made up of 4 people, and one of the 4 is usually a support. So that percentage needs to be 25%. There's still a 3.5% lack of supports, which is the reason why I left out the support classes. Supports will have no trouble finding parties. I do have 2 questions though. First question, on the comments, there's not a single where's Bard. They're all where's Paladin. Can anyone explain why that is? I cannot understand this and I don't know what to make of this. Second question, are you asking where's Paladin in terms of DPS class? If that's the case, I saw a post from a guy who mains a DPS Paladin. He said a lot of things about DPS Paladin and how it's viable and stuff. Out of all his comments, only one thing caught my eye, which is you also need a Bard in the party. That just ends the discussion right there. However, for solo playing, go for it. I was getting a carrier this one time and the carrier, DPS Paladin, actually pulled through pretty fast, so... And I almost forgot to mention DPS bars can solo play and the carries too. A lot of supports will have 2 builds ready, one for DPS and one for supporting. Next thing I want to clarify on is this poll I used in the last vid. The reason why I use this poll is because out of 21,659 people, 7,650 people voted on Reaper as a class they don't want to accept as a party member for a Broshut, which is the latest raid. That's 34%. I wanted to point out that perception on a class can get this bad and that it could have a negative influence on the user's game experience. But Smilegate did mention 2022 is going to be a year of class balancing over and over, so hopefully all of this will be fixed in a timely manner. I'll talk more about Reapers as I explain about the class later in this video. The other classes in top 3 sections, percentage wise, don't vary that much. I should have put percentages there also cause these are kinda hard to catch. The ones in the 4th row are the ones that are significant. But even then, nothing beats Reaper's 34%. Next thing I want to talk about is an artillerist. There were many people who were disappointed because I only covered on the class for like 20 seconds. So I gave it a hard thought on what else I can inform you on. And I decided to give you some side info and some of the difficulties they're facing at the very end game. Artillerist is such a miracle of a character which never got nerfed in the history of its existence. They only receive buffs. I'm not sure if the buffs were meaningful buffs, but yeah, they were never nerfed. Artillerists are probably the most reliable, stable class in terms of solo playing, party playing, PvP, PvE, and etc. But they can, and I don't know if I should call it troll, but they can have some trouble starting from Legion raids. In the Legion raids, the bosses often have this 2 to 3 second pattern where if you attack them during this 2 to 3 seconds with enough stagger damage, the boss will counterattack, which can seriously harm the allies, often resulting in wipes depending on the raid. So from the delayed attacks of artillerists, they could initiate a missile skill, and the boss can all of a sudden use his counter pattern before the missiles land, and when the missiles does land, it often results in wipes. Other issues can occur from use of their identity. So their identity turns them into a stationary siege mode, which is cool, but it does have its downsides. They have like 4 sets of skills to use while they're in this siege mode, and the laser skill is fine, but their artillery, I don't know if they need more gunpowder or something, but for real, like, come on, right? I mean, where's the firepower? Also, getting off this stationary artillery mode takes a bit of time. So without some kind of emergency ejection function, you're often vulnerable to the CC attacks from enemy bosses, which can result in these kind of situations. Other than that, once you get experience of these raids, it's a solid class. Now let's move on to the classes which are not going to be there for the release. Before we begin, I want to talk to you about something. Some of you probably have seen those videos of people measuring their 2-minute DPS hitting this poor lion dummy thingy. Measuring DPS on this stationary target doesn't mean a whole lot. This is just a practice ground for you to check which skill does more damage and check on your skill cycles and cooldowns. No bosses, well maybe except for the Abrosian Phase 4 boss, no bosses are going to stay in one spot. They're either going to fly around, jump around, float around, turn around, and make you chase them around. So no one knows who ranks number 1 or 2 in terms of DPS other than the developers themselves with their data. However, I believe the positional classes, positional meaning head attack or back attack classes, should have higher DPS than the non-positional classes such as Gunslinger or Sorceress, at least in this Trision place. If positional classes getting 100% back attack and head attack, hitting this non-moving dummy does less DPS than the non-positional classes, I think there's a serious problem there. Of course, there are other variables like how tanky the class is or how mobile the class is and etc, but still, I think positional classes should be doing at par, if not more damage, compared to Sorcerers, at least in Trision. No offense to Sorcerers. With that out of the way, let's move on to the classes, and we will start with my main, Destroyer. The thing about Destroyer is... where do I begin? So how Destroyers work is you have to gather these cores by using the blue skills, which have pretty much no damage, and then unleash with purple skills. The purple skills, depending on how many cores you have, will get the according buff for damage. But before unleashing the purple skills, you have to use the Endure Pain skill, which is a synergy skill of enemy defense break of 24%. This is a basic combo. The reason why I'm using the skill from sideways or at a distance is because this skill has tripod, which really boosts damage when hit with the edge of the hammer. This is similar with a seismic hammer, which is the second most damaging skill as well. I have to hit the enemy with the edge of these rocky spikes for most damage. This is already looking pretty handicapped, right? Well, there's more. So this is our skill combo. You use the seismic and then spacebar onto the boss's head, then use Endure Pain immediately for 3-core seismic hammer damage while synergy is applied. Then you use a blue skill to gain the cores, and then slightly move to the side to use the perfect swing. This way you can use 2 major damage skills in one Endure Pain, which is 6 seconds. Now here is where the problem occurs. We have tripods in our blue skills, which are called the lucky core. By probability, 75%, 65% and whatever, we will gain an extra core by RNG. See how I just got 2 cores? So if I get 2 cores here with good luck, my perfect swing hits with maximum damage. However, if I get unlucky with a core, I have to use my perfect swing with 2 cores, meaning RIP my damage. This is a struggle destroyers have to go through for half of Sork's 1 skill damage. Also, one of the problems with this skill combo is using the spacebar for this combo means I'm putting myself at risk using my survival skill to use on a skill combo. And all of this has to hit the enemy on the head. Other than that, it's a very tanky class, one of the classes with highest numbers from a single skill, very satisfying effects and experience when hit right. During last Law on Convention, the director did mention that they're looking into classes with unfair skill design, and we all know this refers to Destroyer, so looking forward to that buff, Mr. Kung. Sir, we remain at your mercy. I think this might include artillerist and scrapper as well, but we shall see in March. Next class, let's look at Lancemaster. Lancemaster is such a good class in general. The specialty stat bonus on Lancemaster is very effective buffs, and because Lancemasters have skills with self buff on crit chance, you can just allocate most of the stats on specialty and the rest on agility. You don't even have to worry about critical because of their critical / identity perks and party synergy of 18% crit chance buff. Just letting you know, party crit chance synergy is one of the most preferred synergies in this game. Lancemasters are non-positional unless you decide to use a unpopular class engraving, which only allows a glaive skills, which are the blue skills. In this case, you become a back attack positional class. Lancemaster is a very practical class because they can attack from long range and close range. Also, they have this one skill which can parry an attack from an enemy. Only 2 classes have this skill and the other is Gunlancer. Why do Gunlancers have everything? Lancemaster is a very popular class in KR, and you can tell how popular a class is by checking on the prices of their legendary class engraving book in the auction house. Overall, practical, high DPS, easy to join parties with their synergy, mobile, and fun class to play with switching between the skill slots. Next up, Scouter. Scouter with a legacy class engraving is probably one of the most fun and engaging classes to play, as you can basically turn into an Iron Man. It has such a cool interface too. Scouter, in my opinion, is a pure DPS class. I think all classes with 6% attack or damage buff synergies are pure DPS classes. As a gunner class, it's supposed to have one of the weakest defense and health coefficients in the game, but you gain this massive shield when turned into this Iron Man form, so that's pretty ironic. I would say the class is non-positional class. You can attack the enemy from the side, front, back, above, or underneath. One of the benefits with these transformation classes is that there are these gems, right? What these gems do is they are assigned to a specific skill of a class, and they either increase the damage or reduce the cooldown of that specific skill. Well, currently 5 of Scouter's transformation skills are grouped as one transformation skill, and you only need 2 gems, one for damage and one for cooldowns, and it will be applied to all of those skills in transform state. So the cost to set up the gems are super cheap compared to other DPS classes. I see them in the MVP screen very frequently because they can pretty much spam the boss with attacks non-stop thanks to the fat shields they have. The technology engraving, however, was probably the least played and least known to public. Basically, they used the drone and the submachine gun to attack the enemy. Much dorkier version compared to Iron Man. Let's have a quick look at the price of the engravings. See, it's so cheap. In my opinion, however, I think this build should have way higher DPS ceiling than the Iron Man build. Because they don't have shields, they have one of the lowest defense and health coefficients. They are more expensive to set up because they need gems for all the skills. And I think they may have higher DPS ceiling as I can see more technology build in the top 100 ranked users compared to before. I've seen the gameplay of technology build. It's very quick paced, spammy, non-stop deal damage style of play. If I had to recommend a build from the Scouter, I would recommend the Iron Man build, of course, because they're just more reliable when it comes down to surviving in the raids. But if you want to test your skills and like the concept of using guns and drones, I think a technology build is another viable choice. Now, the next 3 classes I'm about to talk about, I'm going to let you know in advance that I've never played them. I've never even looked at them. I've never even considered playing them. I'm going to try to provide you with most reliable information from my point of view from interviews, and try to do my best to lay them out for you. If you don't believe in information which didn't come from first-hand experience, I recommend you to check out Andy May's videos as he plays all of the classes. With that said, let's start with Arcana. Arcana, despite being non-positional class, is probably the most difficult brain-using and RNG class to play in all of Lostark. The basic mechanism of a skill cycle is you have the stacking skills, which stacks up to 4 on the enemies, and then there's the synergy skill, which is considered constant 10% crit chance buff for you and your party members. And then there's the major DPS skills, which uses up the stacks for more damage. On top of that, she has 12 identity cards, each with different buffs and effects, which you have to memorize. So while you're stacking and dodging enemy attacks or whatever, you have to gather the gauge in order to pick an identity card. You can do this up to 2 cards and then use them for buff on your major DPS cycle. This already gives me too much headache. There's this combination of 2 cards which are known to give Arcana some unheard of burst damage numbers. But also there's a meme in Korea. Her cap on DPS ceiling comes once every week. This is probably a little bit exaggerated, but it just means that DPS is really RNG depending on which of the 12 cards you pick. Now, depending on the identity card you picked, you have to make a choice to do sustain damage or burst damage. For example, let's say you picked one of the 2 cards I mentioned before. For the next card, you picked a mediocre card. Now, do you just use a mediocre card combination, or do you wait, gather more identity gauge, and pick another, hoping for the maximum damage? If you're lucky, you can be on the MVP screen with some ridiculous percentage of damage dealt. If you're unlucky, your face won't even be on the MVP screen. You have to pick the cards, make on-the-spot decisions, keep stacking on the enemy, keep applying your synergy skill while dodging enemy attacks. Gotta let you know, Arcanas do have one of the lowest defense stats in the game. So you need quick thinking as well as good hands in order to play the class, is my opinion on Arcana. I just made her sound really bad, didn't I? Well, that's just my opinion. Next up is Summoner. Summoner, in my opinion, is a newbie friendly class because she can basically stroll around and let her pets do the damage for her. However, in order to maximize and really do some DPS like the other DPS classes, you actually have to know how to use her 2 skills, which put you in an animation lock. One of them is Ancient Spear and the other is Winged Spirit. You have to know the timing to use these 2 skills because, like all other mage classes, she does have wet tissue like defense stats. Her party synergy is more of a burst rather than constant enemy defense break of 24%. She is one of those few classes which can use 2 of the class engravings at the same time for a higher DPS ceiling, which also means it can be super expensive to set up. I think that's about it for Summoner. Last but not least, let's talk about Reaper. I personally never even thought about playing the class because of the high skill requirements on the class. But there are a lot of Reaper users in KR because they are most assassin-like classes from the assassin classes. Anyways, I interviewed one of my guild member who uses both Thirst and Moonsound build. He's probably one of the best Reapers I've seen, as he is frequently seen in the MVP screen with most damage dealt. Reaper is one of those classes who has to get the back attack because of one of their biggest DPS skill, Lazy Spear, or whatever they will be translated to. The Lazy Spear has to be hit from the back because of one of their tripod, which increases a skill's damage by 50-70% when hit from the back. This is probably the reason why they are often found dead due to unknown cause. When you ask the person how'd you die, they'll probably tell you, I don't know, I was just trying to get the enemies back and next thing I know I was dead. You know, accidents can happen to anyone. Well, it's just that when the accidents happen on Reapers, they don't end with injuries. Yes, they have the wimpiest defense stats as well. So I'm going to explain a bit about the two builds and how they differ from each other. But first, I'll start with something in common. They have the green skills, which are used to build 3 stacks for a party synergy buff of 20% crit damage buff. I think many of you have this misconception that this is like the biggest buff, but when you break it down, it's 20% of critical hit, meaning it's 20% from this percentage. So it's basically similar to 10% base attack buff. On top of that, the synergy doesn't mean anything if you don't get a critical hit. So it's not considered the best synergy out there. Anyways, so Reapers in general use the green skills and purple skills in order to fill up the identity gauge for their buffed attacks. How you make use of the gauge is what identifies a Thirst build Reaper and the Moonsound build Reaper. Reapers have 2 gauges, the green and the red. You have to fill up the green gauge first by using the green skills and the purple skills, and then the red gauge will start filling up. The effects from red gauge is called the Chaos mode, will turn on automatically when fully filled, which are crit chance boost of 15%, movement and attack speed boost of 10% for 9 seconds. The 9-second buff can be renewed constantly by using the green skill Dagger Throw, which has to hit the enemy, and the purple Distortion skill, which doesn't have to hit the enemy. This identity effect is what the Thirst Reapers will use. So they have to keep using these skills to renew the identity and maintain it. On the other hand, the Moonsound Reapers use the green gauge. The green gauge, when fully filled, can be activated by pressing Z again, which makes you invisible, and this is called the Persona mode. When in Persona mode, the red skill damage gets 25% buff every second, and it goes up to 125%. Now, what the Moonsound engraving does, it gets rid of the accumulated buff of 25% per second, and it gives you 160% damage buff on your red skills instantly for about 5 to 6 seconds. So it's basically a routine of gathering green gauge using purple skills and green synergy skills, go into Persona mode, then spam the enemy with red skills from the back. To sum it up, the Thirst Reaper is quicker paced, sustained damage style, whereas the Moonsound build is more burst and still some sustained damage, but not as quick paced. So I asked my buddy if he thinks there's enough return in DPS for the risk of having weakest defense coefficients and high skill cap. He said there's definitely a big return in DPS as long as you can get the back attacks and not die. Oh, and I have to show you one thing about Specialist, and that wraps up my opinions on classes. In conclusion, when I looked at the delayed classes, most of them have something in common. And there's a problem with the class. They're either very difficult or need some balancing or need some rework. I don't understand why Lancemaster, Summoner, and Scouters are delayed. Maybe they're trying to balance Lancemaster's OPness and equalize content like the Hell modes. But Scouters and Summoners, I honestly have no clue why they're delayed. But that ends today's video. I will be playing the NA starting from the 8th. I will be streaming and I will be leveling with Deathblade. So if you want to get some tips on leveling, please stop by my YouTube or Twitch stream. I will be able to answer a lot of questions because it's just leveling, so stop by and feel free to ask questions. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video. Bye bye.